Hello, I'm Dr. Vanderslice, and we're doing another of our series of videos about the essentials of fiction writing. And one essential, which I think is underappreciated, is setting. Stories should and do happen in specific places. Stories don't happen nowhere. That's what I like to say. And therefore, wherever your story is set, and it could be a fantasy story, that setting needs to be made clear to the reader. And it's only going to help your story to do that. What I really would advise people not doing is just pretending like it doesn't matter, pretend like my story could happen anywhere, or I can get to it later. I think you are losing an opportunity for your story to get that much richer and that much more immediate and engaging for a reader. Readers appreciate when the writer gives them something. When the writer gives them nothing, the reader doesn't really have anything to grip onto in their imagination. And that includes setting. So, what is setting? Let's first talk about the why. Why would I want to go to the trouble to make my setting for my story so clear and so tangible? Well, one reason is that setting is also action. They cannot be distinguished from one another. Setting adds to the action possibilities in the story and it effectively makes things happen depending on where the story is set. As soon as you choose to set your story here as opposed to there, ideas for events to happen in the story will likely come to you or be clarified, because you'll have some very fundamental aspects of the story set down, and then you can go on to all the other steps of it because you've got your setting decided. The other thing that setting does, it enhances characterization. There's a famous phrase that some people like to use, that setting is character, or at least setting can be a character. And I would agree with that, because where a story takes place is, of course, going to affect the people in it and the environment around those people. How can that not matter to them? And you have to wonder, if it doesn't matter at all, what is the actual story being told here? There's a famous writer named Richard Russo who thinks about settings a lot and writes about them. And I remember reading an essay by him, and he said whenever someone mentions a new book to him by this or that author, his first question to them is always, where does it take place? He needs to know that before he can hear anything more, because it affects so much about the story and the characters. And he wants to be reassured that the writer has thought about that, and it's aspect of fiction writing that comes through. The other thing that setting can do, and this hopefully won't be a surprise to you, and that is mood. What kind of mood a piece of writing projects to the reader and has the reader feel is very much dependent on where that takes place. And that can be an interior setting, or it can be an exterior setting. Both of those have a very strong ability to create a certain kind of mood for a piece. In fact, if you think to yourself, and not only where it is, but how the writer handles that particular setting. For instance, if I were to say to you, okay, in your story, I want you to have a character who is looking out the window of a museum. Now, this character, let's say, do it twice. The first time, the character just found out that they got the job they always wanted. They've just been offered a job. They just got off the phone with someone who offered them the job that they always wanted. Write that setting for me suggesting that emotional state. How does it affect the environment? How does the environment change as a result of it? Or the opposite. Let's say the person just got off the phone with someone who says their favorite pet might have to be put down. How is that going to affect what the character sees and how that setting appears on the page? Setting and mood are entwined. They are effectively one and the same thing, just looked at from slightly different angles, and they can enhance and affect one another incredibly. This one I think is super important, which I kind of talked about, and that is confidence. Why make your setting clear? Because you, the writer, need to be confident in the story you're telling. Often I feel like when someone's not sure where their story is set, they haven't quite engaged with their story. They don't really know it. They don't feel committed to it. I feel like I sometimes, occasionally, will start a story and I'll be writing it, and then I realize, actually, I don't know, like where I want this to be taken. Where is this to be placed? I'm describing a city, but what the heck city is it? And I have to stop because I can't go any further in the story. I can't know where to have the character move next without having a tangible idea of where is this place that I'm supposedly writing about. And once I make that decision, all sorts of opportunities open up for me. Oh, let's say I said it in southern Prince George's County, Maryland, where I grew up. Oh, I know what can happen. I know where this town is and that town. And if it's set here, chances are the character is going to be going over this way. Same thing with any city. And you can tell from what I'm saying to you, I'm referring to realistic fiction, but what I'm saying also completely applies to fantastical fiction, because I feel like one of the core jobs of a writer of fantasy is to make the physical, tangible world and setting of that story clear enough to the reader. The reader can see this setting that really is purely a creation of the author, which is wonderful. But you also have to make it something the reader can move inside of. No. So it's at least as important in a made-up fantastical world to pay attention to setting as a realistic one. Okay, last, this kind of underlies a lot of what I said about the why, and that is to increase the reader's engagement. It has been my experience from my own writing and from listening to people talk about other people's writings, that the more the setting is clear and a part of what moves the story, the more people appreciate the story and get involved with it emotionally, and it impacts them. I referred to the writer Richard Russo. He said all the time, well, let me back up. A lot of his most famous novels are set in upstate New York. These little towns in upstate New York, I don't know if you're familiar with upstate New York, but there's a lot of towns there that once had thriving industries in the 19th and early 20th centuries. But the world moved on, the world changed, the world economy changed, and those industries that supported those towns dried up, moved away. And yet the town was still there, people still lived in the town. And it was a lot of times it was a struggle to find out, where do you go next? What kind of job do you work? He grew up in such a town, and he writes about such a town. What's amazing is that he makes it so clear, so particular, the particulars of that town that he's describing, that people from all over the world write him letters and say, I know that town, I grew up in that town. But they're talking about a town in England, they're talking about a town in South America. It's because he went to the trouble to engage with the setting and write about it clearly, that the reader feels fully invested in the story and makes all these other connections with the story based on that. I was going to say on the setting alone, but the setting, of course, is also, it goes throughout the story and affects, as I said, character. So it affects everything about the story. But because we're so committed to the place, it ends up making the reader more committed, more engaged, sometimes in very special and emotional ways. Okay, that would be some of the whys. Boy, you do not want to ignore setting and pretend like it doesn't matter. Believe me, it does. It'll help you as a writer, and it'll help the reader tremendously. So then the question becomes, well, what do I do to make my setting clear? Well, what do you mean by that? Well, one obvious thing is to engage the senses. That is, not that you want to go on and on and on for 20 pages about what's around you, around the character, but think about that. Think consciously and deliberately about what is my character seeing? What are they hearing? What are they smelling, perhaps? What's tangible? What's in the air? Whether it's an interior setting or an exterior, each place has its own unique identity. And people don't live in vacuums. Stories happen somewhere. Scenes happen in particular places. Describe that. Use your senses. Think about it. Don't just write, oh, my character lives in the story. What was happening? What was the character seeing, smelling, touching? And make that real in the world of your story. A couple other what's. Let's say you're deriving a story from an historical setting, which historical fiction is a very popular genre, with good reason. I think it's very engaging. Well, what do I do in a historical setting? I don't live in that period. How do I find out? How do we make it real to the audience? Well, we could do a whole video just on historical fiction, but I will tell you a clear resource is photographs, whether that's a family album, whether it's photographs online, whether it's photographs at a museum. Many towns, cities have museums dedicated to that place. If you could go there and look at pictures, that gives you, the writer, something in your head concretely to go on. You need something concrete in your head when it comes to setting. If you just sit back and say, oh, what do I think London looked like in the 1620s? Well, yeah, you'll put a few things down, but if you actually are able to see pictures now, no photography in the 1620s, but if you're able to see visual renditions that are from this time period, that'll give your fiction-making mind something to wrap around. So yes, photographs, but also paintings, drawings. Another super helpful source is maps. Go to historical maps. Or if it's a present day place and you've never been there, go to a map. Please get a map. Whether it's going to Google Maps or finding one online, once you have a tangible picture of what the layout of this place is, that gives you a lot to go on as a writer, and confidence. I once read a novel that was set in Leningrad, I think it was, which is Stalingrad. And the writer had never gone to that city before they wrote the novel. In fact, the writer wrote the entire novel not having gone there, and only went there after the book was done. And the writer said she worked from maps and photographs. That's what she relied on, and that's how she made the place real. And she said, when I finally visited there, I felt like I knew where everything was because I studied it so thoroughly, just from the maps and the pictures. A couple of things. The best resource, one of the best resources for writing about an historical period and what it looked like and what was going on then, read novels written during that period. Because the people writing those novels lived lived in that place that you're thinking of. That it was around them all the time. It's reflected in the work. And they weren't writing their novel in order to be a historical document later, but effectively it is. When I do historical fiction and I read a novel set that was written in the period I'm writing about, it becomes so much clearer to me, that period, and what things might have existed in that setting, what they look like, what people call them. There's all sorts of useful information to be derived from novels written in that period. So we'll leave it there. Thank you.